December 17th is designated as National Maple Syrup Day. While Vermonters consider any day that ends in Y a good day to enjoy maple syrup, we don't mind sharing this signature Vermont crop with the rest of the U.S. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. We never pass up a chance to talk maple on Fence, so when we learned that a new science director had been hired to lead one of our favorite UVM places, the Proctor Maple Research Center in Underhill, we knew we wanted to talk to him. Tim Rademacher grew up in Europe and went to school in the United Kingdom before landing in America at Harvard, where he taught a tree to talk. Well, sort of, and we'll get into that in a minute. Welcome to Across the Fence.
Thanks for having me, Jolie.
Absolutely, and welcome to Vermont as well, I should say. You've only been here for a little while.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a whirlwind, but it's a fun place to be.
Sure. So when did you start at Proctor Maple?
I started at UVM and at Proctor Maple about 2 months ago on the 1st of October. So it's all fresh, it's all new, it's all exciting. So much stuff to do.
Sure. And Europe isn't really known for its maple syrup crop. So when did you decide to take your career this direction?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Europe is a consumer, but not a producer at all. And even on the consumer side, a much smaller market than North America. I didn't grow up with maple. I didn't know anything about maple. I grew up in greenhouses. I knew about plants, and I studied plants at university. But then it took basically my entire professional career to get interested in trees and in sugars in trees, and then by chance in Canada I got involved with maple syrup, fell into the evaporator, and that stuff's sticky, so I couldn't get away from it.
Absolutely, that's one way to think of it. And I mentioned that you spent some time at Harvard, which is where you did your postdoc, and you also talked about kind of the Harvard forest. Is that nearby campus?
It isn't. It's quite far away, actually. So Harvard Forest, where I was based, is kind of a research and education forest. It's in some ways quite similar to Proctor. So Harvard Forest is about an hour, 70 miles or so east of Boston, and it's really in a small village called Petersham. There are parallels that you could make with Proctor, where I'm now. Proctor is, 40 minutes away on the slopes of Mount Mansfield. Most people from campus never come out there. It is one of these research outposts that we try to open up more and more now, actually. So we want people to come there, and we want it to be open and transparent to show the science we do.
And talk about some of the research you did when you were at Harvard with a talking, or rather we should say tweeting tree, which was a centuries-old red oak.
Yeah, that was a fun project. We had so much fun with that. Basically, at some point while working there, I'm an ecophysiologist by training. What does that mean? I try to study how trees function. And we had all of these data streams where we had, data coming in real time, and I could see it. And I saw a story that was written there in the data, but I also realized I was the only one that was able to read that story because of my training as a scientist. And that's the magic of science, right? It renders the invisible visible. So I saw this and I thought, how can I translate this so that more people can see this story unfold? And that story for me was the story of a tree, life as a tree in a changing environment. So I tried to develop an algorithm that analyzed this data and then translated it into human readable messages. So the tree would say, and I'm saying the tree here, I'm anthropomorphizing, but it's really the data talking. But the tree would post a message like, oh, today's the 24th hottest day I can remember. And that was based on weather data of 65 years of weather data. And we use this to kind of make the story of this tree more palatable and get it out to a bigger public. And it worked very well as an outreach measure.
Is that something you're considering doing at Proctor?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I would love to get back to. Outreach is one of the 3 pillars of what our mission at Proctor is. We have research, education, and outreach. So I hope to, at some point have Marv the Maple tell you about the sugaring season and, the wonderful syrup we're making, about the leaf color changes and why they are a certain color at what point in time in the fall. The bottleneck at the moment is data. So Proctor is a research site, and we have some long-term data streams, but to make a message interesting, you need to contextualize it with historic data. And also, we need to have enough of a diverse data stream so that we can do different messages and not just talk about the temperature every day. So we are building up that data stream at the moment, and I'm hoping to develop Proctor as a long-term research site so that we can really gain insights into this story and then start telling it. And start telling it maybe through social media, but not only, also get classes involved, get canine education involved, like different ways to basically look at this story.
And one thing we talk about a lot when we're thinking about sugaring or really any of Vermont's forests is kind of climate change and climate resilience. So how has that kind of study changed since you were at Harvard in 2018?
Yeah, it's a lot and nothing much has changed, right? It's very strange that the science is slowly moving. Science is not revolutionary. Science is something that we incrementally improve. So we know more about it. We certainly know a lot more about it in maple, because maple is so young as a field in terms of the science that there are still loads of easy gains to be had, so to say. So we've learned a lot about maple, but there's still so much uncertainty because we lack data to answer some of the important questions. And at the moment, one of my main missions is actually to talk to producers, to talk to the industry, to talk to the maple community at large, and figure out what are the important questions. Which resource, how should we use the resources that we have to answer the most important questions first? And climate comes up very often and very much on top of the priority list. We do know that climate impacts the production already. We do see a shift to earlier and earlier in the season. But there are still uncertainties on how does that affect the overall season, the quality of the syrup, the overall volume of productions, and how does that affect the long-term health of the trees as well. And this requires long-term research. These trees, we work with a crop that lives for over 250 years. So it's difficult to get answers in a year or two. And this is why I think we really need to put out the emphasis at Proctor on long-term research.
And what do you think is the value of studying something so localized? Maple syrup's really only common in North America, but what's the broader value of this research?
I told you this, I didn't come into this from, I'm a maple person. I came into it because I'm fundamentally curious about trees. Maple is such a fantastic opportunity to understand the functioning of trees, all the reserve dynamics, what the tree does with sugars during the winter, how it remobilizes them. All these things are actually really difficult topics to get at and to fund. But maple is interested in them because they are at the base of their product. The sugar that we use in maple sugaring is something that is dependent on these reserve dynamics. So there's a wonderful link between applied and basic science in maple that I think we can apply beyond maple, and there we might find some fundamental truth about how trees work that might be applicable throughout the world.
And you mentioned before that you worked in Canada a little bit before moving to the Proctor Research Center. So how did that kind of inform your work now?
That was really eye-opening, and that's where I fell in love with maple. I worked in Quebec and at a similar research institution. There are slight differences, but it was eye-opening to this potential of maple. The fact that there is an industry that's interested in not cutting down the trees, but preserving their health. And for me, that was something very new, because previously I had only worked with forestry, where generally the idea is we just want to produce high quality timber as fast as possible. And that is slowly changing, but it's still the main objective of that industry. Moving to an industry where it's kind of, we want to preserve the health of the tree and the ecosystem. And I'm still collaborating with colleagues north of the border, because maple doesn't know there is a border. This is a political one, and nature doesn't care. So to study climate change, we need to study it from Quebec to Kentucky. So I work with producers in Kentucky at the southern range and in Quebec, so that we really understand the tree itself and the ecosystem.
Absolutely, and we work with Mark Isselhart here on Across the Fence a lot. He's a regular guest, and we're always happy to have him. And he works with UVM Extension on kind of that maple outreach and some research. And he likes to remind us that even though there's a lot of study that occurred in Canada and the US about sugar maples, there's a lot we still don't know. So what are different questions that you got maybe from your tenure there you hope to answer here?
Yeah, there's so much we don't know. I mean, maple has evolved so quickly. The industry has exploded over the last 20 years, and our yields have exploded. We now take twice as much sugar from the trees than we did a generation ago, right? And we don't have a clue what that means. As I said earlier, these trees, they can live for 250 years. So, you know, we've not done this for 250 years. We don't know the long-term consequences. So for me, the two major research axes is really how can we steward the land and how can we preserve the health of the ecosystem and the trees in the long run. And that's not just because the technology has changed and our yields have changed, but the general context has changed as well. We have climate change, we have invasive species, we have so many other factors that come in. We have a biodiversity decline which might cause problems in the future. And we are trying, at Proctor, we are trying to get ahead of these things and understand them before they become real problems, so that we can develop strategies to adapt. And hopefully be part of the solution, you know, be part of, try to mitigate some of those problems.
And you kind of touched on technology already. How has that changed production? Has kind of the romance of an old sugarer been lost?
Well, it has changed, but change is part of pretty much any industry. Change is a very natural thing. That has impacts, that change. It has impact on labor. It's much easier to do maple sugaring now than it was previously. You don't have to lug heavy buckets of sap through the forest anymore. You don't have to have a horse to, you know, pull your sled. These innovations have been widely adopted. Tubing, vacuum pumps, reverse osmosis, because they save labor. They make your life easier and they make it more profitable. The industry could never have expanded without these technologies. That said, it is quite often maple still relies on this bucolic image of, you know, this wonderful ecosystem that doesn't have, it's not seen as a production landscape quite often, which it has become. And I think tubing is the one big change, this plastic tubing, that people quite often cite because that's visible in the forest and that changes the aesthetics of the forest. It's part of what is needed to make this industry sustainable. And I think it's something that we need to do to make sure that there's also an economic bottom line, because sustainability requires ecology, social and economic aspects, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can't make money with it, then we can't steward the ecological, the ecosystem either.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're about tapped out for today. And I want to thank the sweetest crew who works behind the scenes here at WCAX who makes our program possible. Happy Maple Syrup Day. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.